Sermon of the Week, Desire, based on the book Song of Solomon. Honey, how old are you now? Solomon's mother asked her son. Of course, she knew exactly how old he was. She still could feel the pain he caused her at his birth. 15, he said. Now that you're a king, I suppose your next task is finding a queen. Oh, Mom, I've only been king for a week. I've got to spend all my time learning how to be one. You know, there's a lot to do, and I don't know the first thing about kinging. The young king got up off his throne and began to walk around the throne room. He'd never been more nervous than he had this past week. His father, King David, had died, and he couldn't eat or sleep, much less think about women. Above all, he was certain his life was and would be in constant danger. He realized being on top of the world was a dangerous and lonely place. He now could trust no one, not even his own mother. Well, he trusted her the most. Son, I've gotten over 100 requests from all over the world. They come from parents who want their daughter to be your queen. Some of these are beautiful girls. You should look at their pictures. Maybe one would catch your eye, Bathsheba said. Solomon threw his hands in the air. Mom, I haven't got time for this. Please don't bother me with such trivial stuff. Honey, she said, coming over to him and putting her rather buxom body next to him and putting her arm around his neck. A queen can help you. She can help you rule. Solomon thought a bit and then said, I'm sorry, I just have to work all this out before I can make decisions about queens. I understand, dearie, but I'll have one request you should take seriously, she said. Mom, remember your father's private nurse, Abishag? Bathsheba said. Who can forget her? She paraded around in the nude all over this place. Honey, she served a great purpose. Your father, King David, was always so chilled, and when we brought her in, she warmed his body. It comforted him in his last hours, Bathsheba said. You could have done that, Solomon said. Honey, this body is wide, but it's old and cold. I wasn't able to do what she could, Bathsheba said. So what's your point? Solomon said. She came by yesterday to see me, Bathsheba said. What for? She wants to be your queen. Right. All she wants is money. Father gave her a house and several thousand shekels of gold. Son, hear me out. She's arguably the most beautiful woman in all the world, and she has some experience with kings. Your father said she was a good lover. Yeah, first my father loves her, now I have to love her. No, thanks. Besides, Dad was on death's door. He never made love to her. Not so sure. Your father was, well, I really think you should consider it. Can I bring her in tonight for dinner? No, maybe next week. I've got to have time to think and study, Solomon said. Son, I had another request, Bathsheba said in a whisper. What'd you say? I had another request. What's that one? Solomon said, staring around the room. He was getting edgy and needed to sit back down. Adonijah, your older brother, has asked Abishag to marry him and asked me to ask you for permission. Solomon's face turned beet red. He walked back up to his throne and sat down. He stared at the floor, shaking his head. I'm not sure I want to be king. Son, if you don't make Abishag your queen, your brother may try and usurp your throne. After all, Abishag was the woman closest to your father when he died. If you don't make her queen, the whole country may turn on you. And of course you, Solomon added. Honey, I love you more than anything, but as your oldest surviving brother, he's next in line for the throne. Well, what do you want me to do about it? Solomon asked, throwing up his hands again. You know what you have to do. You have to make Abishag your queen and eliminate your brother, Bathsheba said with a calculatingly even voice. Solomon thought this over for quite a while. Finally he said, Sure, have Abishag come to supper. I'll figure something out. When supper rolled around, Solomon, who was always late for everything, came in a half hour after the guests had arrived. He took a seat between two very beautiful women. On his left was Abishag, dressed in a very low-cut white gown. Her long black curls hung to her waist. On his right was another visitor, dressed in a low-cut golden gown. Her black hair was stacked high on top of her head. Bathsheba introduced her as the daughter of Pharaoh. As the dinner wore on, Solomon's attentions, which initially were directed at Abishag, the girl he knew, soon turned 180 degrees to the stunning girl on his right. Soon the array of desserts was brought out. Solomon hadn't touched his food, but now took a piece of white cake and fed it to the girl on his right, the daughter of the most powerful ruler in all the world, Pharaoh. On the table was a beautiful crown setting on a burgundy satin pillow. It had been put there by Solomon's mother, Bathsheba. Bathsheba now stood. "My son Solomon, the king of Israel, has an announcement to make. Please give him your undivided attention." She reached over and grasped the crown from its perch on the pillow. She handed it to Solomon. Solomon took the crown from her, a blank look in his eyes. "Go ahead, son. It's time to crown your queen," Bathsheba said. "Hear, hear," could be heard from all around the table. Solomon finally grasped the fact that his mother was blackmailing him, and his face turned beet red for a second time this day. He stared around the room, listening to the plaudits of all the onlookers. He then stared for a long moment at the spectacular girl in the white gown on his left. He cradled the crown in both hands and slowly raised it. The plaudits grew louder. He then slowly turned to his right, raising the crown higher, and eased the crown on the head of the beautiful girl in the golden gown, the daughter of the most powerful man in the world. "I give you the new Queen of Israel, Queen Nicole." The human being is a most interesting life form. It is a complex machine that even it cannot begin to understand. Its supreme function is that of reproducibility. It can, in a few short seconds, make a near carbon copy of itself. Of course, this is necessary for it to continue to function or live as it has for millions of years, or 6,000 years, depending on your perspective. However, it requires something in addition to continue its perpetuity, that is, to avoid extinction of the species. Survival of the fittest may or may not apply, but what the human does require is two life forms to create a new one. To get these two life forms to somehow get together to start the process of creating is what is most fascinating. These two life forms, man and woman, have to become close, rather intimate, in order to create a new life form or baby. But what is it that allows or makes two life forms, man and woman, want to become intimate, to want to make a baby? Where does the attraction come from? And then where does the desire come from? Humans have the innate ability to like. They like what they see, they like what they feel, they like what they hear, they like what they taste, they like what they smell. As a baby matures, it develops its own prioritized list of what it likes from most to least. For some, sweets are number one, or the color pink, or the music of the piano. As life progresses, the list of each human is different. But then along comes puberty, and the list begins to change. Now there is the added attraction of the opposite sex. The human must now make a new list of what he or she likes most in the opposite sex. This may take some time, but one day he or she sees another being that very closely fits his likes. For some reason, he or she wants to get to know that person and goes about developing a relationship. If the two are compatible, or get along, or have enough likes in common, the relationship will often progress to the point of caring for one another. This caring may escalate into what is called desire or love. That is, caring more for this particular person more than for any other person. This caring of love may then lead to intimacy and often marriage. Thus, the two will now have the opportunity to procreate, have a baby, and perpetuate the circle of life. But the question still remains, where does this attraction, this desire, this need to create a new life come from? Well, let's see what the wisest man who ever lived was able to find out about that subject. King Solomon was 15 years old when he took the throne of Israel. At the time, Israel was one of the three most powerful nations in all the world. Egypt and Assyria were maybe more powerful, but King Solomon's Israel had an ace in the hole. The other two had their gods, but Solomon had the God. Given their recent history of how Solomon's God had led his people out of Egyptian slavery and established a strong nation, neither Egypt nor Assyria was about to challenge Israel, particularly on the field of battle. They did not want to succumb to some miracle that Solomon's God might deal out, so they bided their time and made attempts to befriend King Solomon and Israel. As the above story shows, the young King Solomon was very impressionable and very anxious about the stability of his kingship. He also was very influenced by his mother Bathsheba, wife of Solomon's father, King David. In addition to taking King Pharaoh's daughter to be his wife, King Solomon also had his only surviving older brother Adonijah murdered. 1 Kings 2:24 and 25. These two actions allowed Solomon to grow up very fast. He now had the wife that everyone in the world wanted, and he had eliminated the greatest challenge to his kingship. It is said that Solomon eventually had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. He must have had box upon box of the Viagra of the day. He outdid his father David by about 900 women. The Bible lists the 8 wives of David, but also adds that he did have more once he took up residence in Jerusalem. When the Bible lists Solomon's wives, it begins with the daughter of Pharaoh as the first in 1 Kings 11:1. I'm sure as this accumulation of women went along, Solomon wondered how it could have happened. He also wondered what brought men and women together, what caused the attraction in the first place, then the desire, then the drive to procreate. As the wisest man in the world, I'm sure he asked his God and many others what fueled such a desire. But as far as I can ascertain, he really never got an answer, at least the one he wanted. 1 Kings 4:32 states that King Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. He is also credited with writing 3 books of the Bible. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon were all written by him. In addition, he is credited with writing the Wisdom of Solomon, a book of the Apocrypha. This was a Jewish book written in Greek. The Song of Solomon is the 22nd book of the Bible and consists of 8 chapters. In essence, it is a song about love. It is also a song about intimacy. At the time, I'm sure it could have received an X rating. I'm sure children were banned from reading it. If you read it slowly and deliberately, you will see that it is a beautiful description of love and intimacy. Lines such as, "Thou hast dove's eyes, thy 2 breasts are like 2 young roes that are twins. My beloved is white and ruddy. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. He feedeth among the lilies," and so on, conjure up attraction, desire, and love. It is said that it may be a song about the supposed true love of his life, the Queen of Sheba, but reading closely, it is more likely a song to all his women. It is a wonderful description of the intimate nature of love, but in the end, the last chapter, chapter 8, Solomon is unable to define true love or determine where attraction and desire come from. I believe he died trying. Solomon's song says, "Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all his substance of his house for love, it would be utterly condemned." Song of Solomon 8:7. He continues, "Thou, O Solomon, must have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. Song of Solomon 8:12. Only 20% of his women satisfy him. He has no idea why. He concludes the book with a hurried note, "Make haste, my beloved, and be thou like to a roe or to a young hart upon the mountains of spices." Song of Solomon 8:14. To this point, he still hasn't succeeded in finding an answer, so he says, "Let's try again." Arguably the wisest man in all Earth's history doesn't get it. After all his experiences with a multitude of women, he seemingly has no clue as to where desire or love comes from. Let's see if history of other famous lovers can provide an answer. Hugh Hefner of Playboy fame is said to have made love to 1,000 different women, yet toward the end of his life he began to marry some of them. Likely he was searching for the same thing King Solomon was. I wonder if he found it. In the list of the most promiscuous people in history, Mr. Hefner doesn't even crack the top 10. Jack Nicholson, Gene Simmons, and Charlie Sheen all proclaim they have slept with several thousand women. But the leader among modern movie stars is Warren Beatty. He claims to have slept with 12,775 women. However, the modern age leader is the great basketball star Wilt Chamberlain. In his 1991 book, he claims to have slept with 20,000 women. Though he never married, the telling point of his book is that he believed he might have been better off, which might be translated happier, sleeping with one woman 20,000 times. Maybe Wilt was starting to get it. Of course, records are thin and non-existent in more ancient history, but like the pharaohs, Caesars, and European kings, who probably outdid these modern lovers, and of course our United States presidents and first ladies were not immune. Other famous women who are high on the list are Cleopatra, Li Shishi, and Theodora of Constantine. But maybe the most promiscuous human of all time comes from the Far East. In 2003, a genetic study, the results indicate that a substantial proportion of men in the world are direct line descendants of Genghis Khan, who ruled the Mongol Empire from 1162 to 1227 AD. History does not tell us whether he got it either. So what actually is it? What gives us desire? What gives us the desire for intimacy? What gives us the need to love? As we have seen, at least in his writings, is that King Solomon, supposedly the wisest man who ever lived, never found out what it is. Evolutionists come to the conclusion that all this desire just happened. One little cell eventually divided into many cells and formed some sort of life form. Then it developed a desire to become intimate with another similar life form, and the long process of evolution took off. Today it has reached a vast and complex network of life forms. Interestingly, some of these life forms are able to reproduce without desire. They can reproduce by themselves. The creationist, on the other hand, believes that God created man and woman and instilled with them the desire in order that they may reproduce and sustain humanity. Of course, they too are aware that there are life forms that can reproduce by themselves. Well, let's see what our Bible says about this. If studied, it can often provide answers to any questions that we can dream up. Let's try it. Genesis starts off things with the actual historical record of human creation. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:27. The Bible states that God created man. Thus God is responsible for instilling in man the capabilities of desire and love. God wants man to desire one another, to love one another. So what purpose does that serve? Well, it ensures that man will be able to reproduce and thus sustain or maintain a human race. But what it also ensures is that man will want to treat his fellow man and woman as he himself would like to be treated. By instilling in man the capability of love and desire, God ensures that humans will want to care for one another. And this caring will give man a feeling of joy and happiness. There is nothing in this world that gives man more joy and satisfaction than the ability to care for his fellow man. The prophet and disciple knew what it was. He wrote, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." John 15:13. Caring for our friends, our loved ones, gives us the greatest satisfaction, the greatest joy. John gives us further proof in 1 John 4:7. "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and every one that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God." John says that everyone that loves is born of a created by God. So God instilled it in us. Put it right here in our little brain, the capability of desiring and loving. No, let me restate that. He instilled in us not the capability, not the need, but he made our desiring, our caring, our loving an essential for life itself. We aren't even human if we don't desire. We aren't even human if we don't care. We aren't even human if we don't love. If we don't desire, care, and love, we aren't even alive. We are dead. There's one other guy in the Bible that also found out what it was. He started out his career as a soldier. He advanced in his army as he became known for his ruthless brutality. As his army turned its aims toward the genocide, Saul of Tarsus became one of Rome's finest generals. But one day, on a trip to Damascus, God had had enough of him. Enough genocide, enough evil. He assaulted Saul and blinded him. The average Joe or human or general would have reacted with a permanent anger. We all would want revenge. We see this over and over in today's world, an eye for an eye. Kill or be killed. Sue the world. It's never our fault. This attitude has led to countless wars and billions of deaths, but the attitude does not change. However, God saw something in Saul that no human before or since sees. He saw deep down in the center of Saul's little brain a possibility. If he, God, could give this Roman general Saul enough misery, enough grief, maybe, just maybe, Saul might turn into someone God might be able to use. I think God took a big chance here. But in review of history, God did the same thing with the likes of Moses, a murderer, Samson, a murderer, David, a murderer, and so many others. To those who place a wager on a sporting event, they get the most satisfaction, the most fun from winning a wager with very long odds. In unlucky 1913, jockey Roscoe Goose and his horse Donerail went into the gate with the odds of 91 to 1. Donerail won by a half length, the Derby winner with the longest odds in history. For you younger ones, mind that Bird won in 2009 with 50 to 1 odds. If you had $2 on that 91 to 1 long shot in the 1913 Kentucky Derby, what would you have done? You would have collected your $182 and you would have gone out and celebrated. You would have danced in the streets. History tells us God is a gambler. He will bet on anyone, even you and me. True, he loses sometimes, but when he wins, especially with the longest odds, his vibes of satisfaction can shake the heavens. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Acts 9:4. These were the words God used to gamble on Saul. Again, it was a gamble, but again, God saw what no one else could possibly see. He saw that deep down Saul got it. Saul became the changed man Paul, and what was God's payoff? Paul became his foremost missionary. He converted literally millions of people to the truth that God is love. Paul wrote over half of the New Testament's 27 books, 14, and he traveled worldwide at the time. There are several accounts of him traveling as far as Spain. Finally, he stood up to the leader of the world at the time, Nero Caesar. Nero, who is most famous for fiddling while his city Rome burned in AD 64, murdered his way to the imperial throne in 54 AD, and eventually murdered the now Apostle Paul in 65 AD. And how did that work out for Nero and Rome? It backfired to the degree that there are now 2 billion Roman Catholics in the world and another 2 billion Christians. And every Christian, every last one of them, knows about and has read Paul's works. Think about that for a moment. Paul's promotion of the death of Christ led to half of the people that have ever lived believing in their God. I'd say God's gamble paid off most handsomely. I'd say it was the biggest payoff in human history. So where does all this history, this rhetoric, this commentary on humanity leave us? What is it? What is desire? How did we get it? How do we use it? Your answer? King Solomon, the wisest man in history, didn't know. He didn't have a clue. How can I be expected to know? How can I do the right thing? How can I do what God wants? I think the only answer to your question is that God put it in you when He created you. What He didn't or couldn't do was to tell you how to use it. Because He gave all the freedom of choice, He must allow you to do as you wish. But, and this is a big but, God has given us a vast, all-encompassing guidebook to assist us in choosing how we do things, including using our desires, our caring, and our love. It's called the Bible, and it's also called human experience. Children may not be able to read at age 4, but they can watch us. We as well can review world history and history that takes place in front of our eyes. It is now painted all over the world by the media, by the internet. Secrets are down to a minimum. We can now see what the imprudent or improper use of desire or caring or love leads to. What it leads to, my friends, is utter chaos. It leads to misery, suffering, and death. The Bible demonstrates this fact ad infinitum, and now the human experience has done the same. Everything is out in the open. Absolutely any human being can understand the proper use of desire, of caring, of love. We have absolutely no excuse to not have it. I have read and reread a verse in Revelation, but I don't think I fully grasped its significance until recently. It states, "And the books were opened, and another book was opened." Traditionally, it speaks to the final judgment, but I think it may have an additional meaning. Our internet, our information age, is one of the ways God opens His books. I believe it is a glimpse into our future, a glimpse into how our final judgment will take place. God, not Al Gore, invented the internet or universe net. Found on that internet is every act of every human, and I might add, every angel that ever lived. We have all been on video from the day we took our first breath, and make no mistake, God had all of that information at His disposal. Probably on one tiny disk or one tiny corner of His omnipotent brain. Everything we do is recorded in the books of heaven. Not only did John the Revelator know of this book, but also Malachi, the Old Testament prophet. He called it the Book of Remembrance, and of course the star of our show knew about this, though he seems to have forgotten it completely. Solomon's father David spoke of it in Psalms 119:89. He states, "Thy word is settled in heaven." Even when you speak to the evolutionists, many believe in God or a God. They somehow separate the evolutionary process from God. But if you ever loved somebody, a person, a husband, or a wife, or a child, or even a friend, it's nearly impossible to not believe in God. One of our greatest contemporary minds, Stephen Hawking, finally concluded before his death that some form of intelligence was behind the creation of the universe. There you have it. Yes, you have it. God put it in you. He put it in all of us. It's in there somewhere. Take the time today and do search your brain and find it. Find it and use it. We have the will to desire, to care, to love. I urge all of us to make the most use of it. When used properly, and we have overwhelming information on the proper use of it, we can experience and provide the experience of happiness, satisfaction, and joy to all those we come in contact with, and most importantly, those we care most about. Then one day in the near future, we can hear those glorious words from our Creator. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Matthew 25:21.